All right. I've been asked by several people to give my opinion and to make a reaction video to this guy talking about people failing at language learning and language learning advice and YouTube and why you fail at language learning and what the right way to learn a language is. This guy apparently is a professor in linguistics. You wouldn't know because he never mentions it, but apparently he is a professor of linguistics and he probably knows way more than I do. Although it'd be interesting to have a conversation in different languages with him and see who speaks more languages. But that's for another day, I guess. Anyway, let's hear what he has to say. And I'm going to put this on 1.25 speed because I know the first. How long is this video? I know the first quarter of the video at least is going to be some random nonsense, like some story, some fluff.
I have an admission to make. I am addicted to YouTube language learning videos. I know better. Most of what most of them say is just all kinds of wrong. There's
I've got a mission to make. Yeah. Um, I don't watch language learning videos on YouTube. People send them to me, and sometimes I watch them if people ask me about it. But it's a massive waste of time. But I've watched a lot of them. I wouldn't know what I know now if I hadn't watched a lot of them.
mountains of academic literature on the science of learning, on memory, on second language acquisition, and on language instruction. But there's something just totally engrossing about watching someone ignore all of that and instead decide
Grossing.
that they're going to do something crazy, like learn Italian by spending a week of 8-hour days memorizing the dialogue in a single man on the street interview. Given that there are so many choices for learning
Wait, someone spent. Let's go
materials
back.
out there, memorizing the decide that they're going to do something crazy, like learn Italian by spending a week of 8-hour days memorizing the dialogue in a single man on the street interview.
Someone spent 8 hours a day for a week memorizing one single piece of dialogue. It sounds like a massive waste of time. He probably learned that piece of dialogue really well, but what happens when he has to have some other kind of dialogue?
Review. Given that there are so many choices for learning materials out there, why is this even a thing? We have textbooks, classes, apps, all at our fingertips, and yet people are frustrated with those and motivated to start their own unhinged experiments on.
Because apps are crap and textbooks are crap. People have been trying, not even trying, most of them don't even try. Or if they try because they have to, because they're forced to in school. Look, where I come from, everyone is forced to learn English basically everyone in a non-English speaking country has to learn English in school, and most people suck at English after 5 to 10 years of classes. So don't tell me that classes and textbooks are like, oh, it's all there. You just have to do it now. It doesn't work, and apps are even worse. Like Duolingo, come on.
Themselves, like Dr. Jekyll and Monsieur Hyde? Well, the answer is that a lot of
What's
people
a hit?
aren't getting what they want from what's out there. And when I think about the various methods that I've used to study various languages, I get it. As a linguist, I'm unburdened by the need to achieve a high degree of fluency in everything I study. I can just study stuff for fun. But I can also see how a lot
I'm
of approaches
burdened.
are really suboptimal. So today, I'm going to talk about what I think an ideal course would look like. No
And I thought I liked using big words, but I'm burdened. I always say like Kamala Harris. I'm burdened by it has what it has been or something.
nobody's doing this.
Anyway,
I don't have to
I'm gonna stop making fun of the guys. I'm gonna comment on the actual opinion, but he
start
just
up capital or
keeps
even
talking
be
and talking
interested
and
to do
saying
something
nothing.
like this. So I'm not going to be mad if somebody else does it. Just, give me a little cut if it really takes off. If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I have a PhD in linguistics from the
Yeah,
University
I
of
thought he was a
Pennsylvania,
doctor.
and I
Yeah,
love languages. On the channel, we
rarely
talk
mentions it.
linguistics, language learning, language use in the real world. Even though nobody is currently doing language education perfectly, you could probably take a lot of these points and optimize your self-study. So let's get into it. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. So here's the thing. Right up front, let me say that the reason nobody is doing this is that it's hard and language specific. Different textbooks.
Are not doing it because it's hard. That already rings a bell. That already rings a bell. What do I tell you all the time? What What's really effective is hard to do, and that's why people avoid it. Okay.
Apps, courses, and other resources do different aspects of this well. So my ideal course would take into account both the science of learning, that is both memory and developing communicative competence, and organize a course around language specific phenomena. It would take into account
Developing communicative competence. Okay, that's being able to speak.
the most common and useful
Okay.
words and phrases. That needs to be unpacked and give a clear understanding of the grammar from the beginning. And ideally, it's native speaker audio or audiovisual materials and culturally relevant. All of that needs to be explained. And yeah, I know I said native speaker, but we really do need a better term for that. So let's start with learning. When I was in high school, I studied
Oh, I think he's got a video on how the term native speaker is racist or something. This is a problem with intellectuals. They take the most useless thing and they write like 1,500 pages about that, while then in terms of real world results they do nothing. I'm not saying the guy does nothing in real world, but it just let's talk about why we should stop using this word or that word and what's wrong with native speaker.
studied French. We had like 2 to 3 classes a week for about 6 class hours a week and homework. And the thing is, the homework was basically learn
That's
French.
not gonna
Like
work.
we'd have these lists of vocabulary and we'd be told to memorize it. Easy enough, except how do you memorize something? Say the word over and over again, make
Use
cue cards with
associations.
pictures of the thing and just look at them a lot whenever you remember to. Do what I did and just stare really hard at the list and kind of read it a bunch. My
No,
most
that's work.
vivid memory of French class was trying to memorize a list of words having to do with parts of an automobile before I had a driver's license. I remember the weather that day, what room I was in, where all the furniture was, the time of day, how frustrated I was, everything. That is, everything but the words. I actually remember learning some of those words years later in France trying to prep for renting a car. Think about that though. My most vivid memory from French class was being frustrated trying to memorize with no guidance. I was a teenage boy with raging hormones, and the time one of the girls in the class wore a very revealing outfit was not as memorable as trying and failing to remember French words. And I have French family, so it's not like I was taking the class for no reason. I could understand the value of actually speaking French. So let's get it right. Memory deserves its own video, but rote repetition and brute force are a tremendous, ineffective waste of time. I've mentioned in other videos that images help, that audio from real human beings helps, that mnemonics are shown to work as much as I find them dumb and annoying, and that anything
Let's go back.
that taps into a tremendous, ineffective waste of time. I've mentioned in other videos that images help, that audio from real human beings helps, that mnemonics are shown to work as much as I find them dumb and annoying, and that
So mnemonics are shown to work, but let's just not use them because I'm way too much of a snob to use something like that. Come on, man. So mnemonics do actually. Let's hear it again from the fancy professor.
helps, that mnemonics are shown to work as much as I find them dumb and annoying, and that
It works, but I find it dumb and annoying. So let's not talk about it and let's not use it.
anything that taps into our
To give him some credit, at least he mentioned it, right? So that's already way better than most people out there, most supposed language experts out there.
baser instincts and our amygdala works. That's arousal, whether it's simply physiological excitement or sex and fear and the frisson of a transgressive mnemonic or whatever. I call these naughty mnemonics, by the way. There's also a wealth of research on the benefits of
That's what he was talking about. Uh, this is what I always say. You use explicit images, things that you should have either sex or violence or something weird, something creepy, something funny, and make it really visual. And if you can involve more senses, you can involve like your sense of smell. Like imagine a smell or something. The more detailed it is, the more likely you are to remember it. And this is extremely effective to memorize vocabulary. You can learn easily 100 words a day, but you need to review them afterwards, obviously.
transgressive mnemonic or whatever. I call these naughty mnemonics, by the way. There's also a wealth of research on the benefits of spaced repetition. The way
So, what do I always say about learning vocabulary? You memorize them with mnemonic associations, and you review them with spaced repetition, which is flashcards, uh, listening to them in context in sentences daily, which is again spaced repetition because you are listening to them on a daily basis, just the same list of words and sentences over and over, like different days. He's basically saying what I do. for now. Let's see how this continues.
The way I think of this is that forgetting is part of the process of remembering. That means you can't really memorize something in one sitting, especially not a lot of somethings. Learning is a sustained
You can though. This shows me he hasn't done. I mean, he hates it, so he hasn't done much when it comes to mnemonics because I remember learning words that I haven't used at all ever for conversation. I just do a part of a list and I memorize them a decade ago, and I still remember them, and I've never used them because the mnemonic association was good. It just visual. I created a mental image, then a couple of reviews the next couple of days, and that's it, and it's there. Never used it, never heard it even, because it's not something that's yeah. There are some words that are not very common, but they're still there, and they put them on lists, vocabulary lists when you're learning a language, and then you never really hear them in real life. Words like that, I've memorized them, never used them, still remember them.
process of forgetting better, if that makes sense. And nobody told me that. They probably didn't tell you either. Some programs try to build it in. ASML has you go through their lessons in a sort of pyramid fashion. Rosetta
Asim is good. Asim is pretty good. Rosetta Stone, I've never tried.
Stone has spaced repetition built into their course structure, even though they never really talked about it in that way. Back when Duolingo had the tree, people had all sorts of names for adding new information and reviewing the old as they lived
Duolingo
in
is
and wound their
garbage.
way through the tree. Duolingo incorporated that into the path, and then, for reasons that are completely mysterious to me, seems to have
Just the fact that we're talking about Duolingo here, why? It's not a language learning method or system or anything. It's just a video game disguised as language learning. Don't use that.
largely done away with it, except in a handful of review lessons. And
Waste
the bit
of
about
time. Complete waste
unusual
of
things
time.
being memorable is part of why Duo had so many weird sentences. Of course, people just remembered the weird and not the words in their target language because nobody knew why there were weird sentences, like my zebra has a balloon. So now I use Anki. Even when I'm doing Duolingo, I'll use an Anki deck that goes with that course. Whatever you do,
Okay. Even when I'm using Duolingo, like, why is this guy using Duolingo if it's useless? He's a literal PhD in linguistics, supposed expert in linguistics. I mean, in linguistics, I'm sure he is. Whatever he like, African American English or whatever, like the accent in this state and the Midwestern American English compared to I'm sure he's an expert in that kind of stuff. But when it comes to language learning, if you want to learn languages and you think using Duolingo is a good use of your time, either either he's not very serious about learning languages, or I mean, he clearly everything he was saying before, everything makes sense. So is he just lazy and wants to, or just enjoys using Duolingo? I don't know. People are weird. People are weird.
recognize that beating the words into your head isn't a one-time thing. It's a process of first exposure, then recognition, then production. Back when I worked at Rosetta Stone, I would use their course until I got physically uncomfortable and angry at the reviews. When you find yourself thinking, this fucking word again, you're getting closer to having it in long-term memory. But notice, I said I use Anki now. Anki does spaced repetition great, but not specifically language learning, and the existing decks are wildly inconsistent and don't take into account a lot of the science around best practices for
Yeah, if you go download Anki from online, usually they're not very good. The way I recommend doing it is download the math sentences or your language islands, and then do retrieval practice from your language into the target language with immediate feedback. That's Anki's great for that.
learning and retaining material. My ideal course in the dream world would explain the science of memory right up front and then build it in. The next part to unpack is communicative competence. That means not just learning a ton of words and phrases, but being able to generate them and generate them in the right situations.
That means speaking. And you know how you get good at speaking? By training your speaking, not with comprehensible input.
That means an approach to language that gets learners combining material and generating their own sentences as soon as possible. This doesn't mean immediate. but it means fairly quickly. One way I do this is by inverting the textbook approach. Every textbook I've ever used has said something like read or listen to the following dialogue, and then given vocabulary, and even later given a grammatical explanation. I would prefer something to start with the vocabulary, get you familiar with it, start scaffolding it into phrases or simple sentences. That is, plug it into the grammar, and then see it in action. You can tell people what they're going to learn so they'd stick around for the fun dialogue or whatever, but dialogue or scenario first is putting the cart.
Who else does this? What I always tell you: take the text, take the transcript of the YouTube video you want to watch, or the audio file or whatever, put it through a vocabulary um, frequency calculator, and use mnemonics to memorize all the words that you didn't know in the text. And then you listen to it after memorizing the words. So when you listen, you understand way more, and you're much more likely to remember it. So you make the input much more comprehensible from day one. This also applies to your speaking. If you write your own lines that you want to say, you translate them, your language islands, you create them, you should first memorize the vocab so that when you're shadowing it, so you're practicing the sentences, saying them aloud over and over because you need to train your ability to speak. It's going to be much easier if you memorize the vocab first. So always memorize the vocab first. Again, he's agreeing with me on this one. Well, on basically everything, on all the good, all the advice, all the serious advice he's giving, like use mnemonics. It works, but it's dumb and annoying. Okay, but it works. Space repetition to review. Again, now he's talking about learning the vocab before the input. It's all stuff that I say all the time.
Cart before the horse. So, like, literally start with, say, rojo and blanco, and then maybe some masculine nouns. Get comfy with those, then put them in simple sentences. The noun is red. Easy. Once you're comfortable with that, which should not be long, then add in some feminine nouns. La mesa es roja, or something. Later, add the irregularities and the exceptions. This can all be like one sitting, by the way. When I mentioned this to my wife, she pointed out that Rosetta Stone tries to do this. I'm not sure if they succeed, but they do like to try to scaffold by providing vocabulary and then using it in context. The same context for every language, though. It's not language specific. And they definitely don't do the grammatical part I suggested, at least not in a language specific way. Language specific is where it gets really interesting, and I don't see people doing this well. Yes, lots of courses have different programs for different languages. The sentences in Spanish Duolingo are different than French Duolingo, unlike Rosetta Stone. But they
Why so
kind of
much
focus on the wrong
Duolingo?
stuff. For instance, a Spanish course will spend a lot of time on stem changing verbs. That's where a word like venir, to come, becomes something like viene, he's coming. But not everywhere. Venemos. So ven, bien.
Venimos.
But that's not interesting. And other languages do that and just don't even talk about it. French does the exact same thing. Venir becomes vient, but also venez and venons. They're just like, that's the verb, memorize it. By language specific, I mean literally tailoring more explanation and repetition to the things that are harder and more different. Guess how many times you need to see reciente or responsable in Spanish to memorize them? A lot less than something like alrededor. That one's actually easier than something less fun. So more time on the things that are more different. But
Yeah, so this is partially true. Most languages, 80 or 90% of the stuff you have to learn, it's basically the same. The kind of lines you need to learn to, or the vocab you need to learn to understand, speak the language. Then each language will have its specific things, uh, like forms that grammar that doesn't exist in your native language. Yes, I will keep using native language, even if this guy says it's racist. Um, like for example, Spanish has and French have the subjunctive, and it's difficult for an English speaker to learn. Yeah, but you can do separate extra exercises for that, and then you learn it relatively quickly. But the general stuff is the same. Yes, this language has the polite forms, and English doesn't. And okay, but general stuff is always the same. You learn all the general stuff, and all of that you learn it on the side, and it's not that hard if you it's a small fraction of the whole language.
But there's another level to this. In French, introduce feminine adjectives first. The masculine forms are all derived from the feminine. So if you know blanche, you can derive blanc, but not the other way around. So teach it that way. In addition, I don't have the most common and useful material, but nobody can agree about what actually counts for that. You could do the most common 1,000 words, but you're going to be spending a lot of time on function words like the. So maybe get rid of stop words or teach them. The determiners that mark gender and so on with the noun. There's options.
It's just overcomplicated things. So You don't need to do all the like the masculine and feminine and blah 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 grammar. No, just learn. You memorize lots of vocab first. And no, not the there and the are and the and not those. You learn nouns, you learn verbs, especially, and then maybe adjectives and um, some adverbs, but mostly nouns and verbs because adjectives and adverbs, they, yeah, okay, they're more important, but they're also important, but later on, nouns and verbs in the beginning. You memorize loads of them, and all the there's and the ands and the all the conjugations in a more complex language. All of that you learn with sentences. You simply learn lots and lots of sentences after memorizing the vocab. You learn them by listening, reading them. Although reading is not as good. Listening, lots of shadowing, listening, repeating, and you learn all of that there without studying the rules. Like the timing of this and the all those like technical terms.
options. You could do n-grams, so bigrams, trigrams, but those end up being partial phrases and stuff. And compound nouns end up being way less common than either of the words that make them up. It's a mess. Not to mention that any sort of
If you're learning a language, you don't want to be thinking of ingrams and bigrams and backgrams and the determinant and the compounds. This and that. Just memorize words and then learn sentences, but and say them aloud. Yeah, and you learn all the grammar. If you make sure that your list of sentences includes all the grammar that you need, you learn all the grammar. It's not that complicated.
top 1,000 words list is corpus dependent. More than anything else, though, I think everyone falls down on explaining grammar. And specifically, explaining where it's basically the same as English, where it's important how it's different, and that the whole system is finite and learnable in a quick amount of time. I'm currently working on my Spanish, and the first thing I did was get a good grammar and try to understand the whole structure. Not memorize it, I'll do that over time, but just, okay, these are the tenses, these are the aspects, these are the moods, these are the morphologically compound tenses, these are the breaks. You got your conditional, you got your imperfect. We use all of these all the time, so it's worth knowing what everything in your target language is right up front, and then working through memorizing it all methodically as you learn. But we spend months getting to things like the conditional, where we'll spend a few weeks and not combining everything the way it's usually combined in real life.
Yeah, Spanish has a lot of those. Pretérito plus perfecto, pretérito perfecto simple. Blah. I mean, I don't even remember them. All those. You know what? We studied all that crap in school. I used to fail it all the time. My written Spanish and spoken Spanish was already really good. Spanish is my second language. Um, my written and spoken Spanish was better than native speaking kids that were in the same class. And well, they failed as well. Everyone failed the grammar nonsense because it was boring as hell and useless. The pretéritos and the objeto directo, blah blah. Because that's just for nerds, for academics, and for linguists that are interested in small details, but they're not after results. If you want to learn a language, you want to like real life skills, you want to build skills. Don't listen to that nonsense. Like people who think in those terms. You need to develop skills, comprehension and speaking, and you need to know those. Or for either of those, you don't need to learn all those terms like the pretérito, this and the tense and the past, the conditional. But no, just make sure you've got a list with all those things in sentences, like example sentences of everything. Lots of examples of each one of those cases and tenses and conjugations. I've got plenty of those in the channel here that I share. And you learn the whole list. And if you see that, like, okay, the equivalent of I wouldn't have come is yo no habría venido. Okay, when you see those like 10 different examples, you know how it works, and then it's just a matter of spaced repetition, listening to those lines until you learn how to use it, and then retrieval practice. You try to say it, you fail, you check the answer, try again and again, feedback every time until you get it right, and that's it. That's how you learn it.
Imagine I tell you a story. Yesterday, I was thinking about reading a book when the phone rang, and it was a friend I hadn't talked to in a long time. He asked me if I wanted to meet him at the cafe, and I would have if I had had the time. Maybe we will later in the week. I could really use a visit. I love coffee. Wish I were coffee. Is that crazy? Like, subscribe, and leave me a comment if you wish you were coffee. That stupid story has the imperfect, simple past, pluperfect, reported speech in the past, and an embedded clause, the conditional, the future, and the subjunctive. Yes, English has a subjunctive. Not to mention declarative, interrogative, and if you count the YouTube call to action, imperative. No, but really.
Okay, another good example here. He's talking. Look, that story has the imperfect this and the subjunctive that, blah, blah. Look at all the like technical terms and all the cases and all the crap.
Like, subscribe, and leave me a comment if you wish you were coffee. That stupid story has the imperfect, simple past, pluperfect, reported speech in the past, and an embedded clause, the conditional, the future, and the subjunctive. Yes, English has a subjunctive. Not to mention declarative, interrogative, and if you count the YouTube call to action, imperative. No, but really.
All the stuff, and all of that is useless. Look, let's go back to whatever I was saying.
Combining everything the way it's usually combined in real life. Imagine I tell you a story. Yesterday, I was thinking about.
Look, let's hear the story again. I'm going to tell you after the story. Okay, no, before the story, I'm going to tell you how to learn all the grammar. So he mentioned like different, like 7 or 8 different this case and that conjugation and then that the tense and blah, 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 the imperfect this. Okay, you write the story, you translate it, and then you create audio files and you shadow it over and over again. You learn to say the whole thing. First, you should memorize the vocab with mnemonics. And you learn the story, and it's 5 to 10 lines, maybe 20 lines if it's a long story. And you've learned some examples of all that grammar, of each and every one of those grammar points, without having to think of, okay, is this imperfect? Is it? No, you just learn it. You take the translation and you learn it, and you learn another story and then another one, and you practice saying them over and over. You create audio files, you listen to them, you review them, and once you've got 1,000 lines, 1,000 sentences of this kind of stories, language islands, you'll probably be able to use all the grammar that you need just with 1,000 lines. If they're your own lines and your own stories and your own opinions on things, you'll be able to use all grammar pretty well just by learning it in context. Nobody studied grammar. I repeat, nobody studied grammar before they learn to speak their native language, right? So, waste of time.
About reading a book.
Let's hear the story. Yesterday, I was thinking about reading a book.
The phone rang, and it was a friend I hadn't talked to in a long time. He asked me if I wanted to meet him at the cafe, and I would have if I had had the time. Maybe we will later in the week. I could really use a visit. I love coffee. Wish I were coffee. Is that crazy? Like, subscribe, and leave me a comment if you wish you were coffee. That stupid story has the imperfect, simple past, pluperfect.
That was what? 10 lines? You can write that, translate that, and learn it in an afternoon. And then you're able to use all those tenses without having to study them. You're able to use one, like in one type of sentence. But you keep doing that every day with more and more sentences that you write, your own sentences about your own experiences and opinions and things. And you learn all the grammar. And that's it.
Perfect reported speech in the past and an embedded clause, the conditional, the future, and the subjunctive. Yes, English has a subjunctive. Not to mention declarative, interrogative, and if you count the YouTube call to action, imperative. No, but really, leave me a coffee emoji in the comments if you like coffee, or tell it to me in your target
I'll leave
language.
him a
Or
coffee
better yet,
emoji.
tell me your favorite type of coffee drink. I am so tired right now. I need the vicarious caffeine boost. So I'd legit start with explaining that there's
In fact,
these
I'm drinking
25
coffee
or
right now.
whatever grammatical domains, and we're going to learn them all. Once we learn a little vocab, we're going to get familiar with these structures, and then learn more details and exceptions and so on as we continue. But I always find that when I learn a new verb, I want to be able to use it across different tenses, aspects, and moods. I want to be able to use it in a subordinate clause or in reported speech. And I feel like I'm stuck just filing away a partially usable word for later, sometimes for years. Lastly, real people using the language in real situations. The AI is getting out of hand. DuoLingo uses AI everywhere, and it's got some wild and frankly very stupid mistakes.
S'il va à la gare, tu l'Y amèneras.
Lots of people
What?
ask ChatGPT grammar questions, which is unhinged because it's basically a reasonable.
Whoa.
Tu l'Y amèneras.
What?
Lots of people ask ChatGPT grammar questions, which is unhinged because it's basically a reasonable looking text emulator and not a thing that, tells you facts. It just shows you something that might look like what a grammatical explanation might look like. Who cares if it's right? You should care. You're going to need real speakers if you have any hope of organizing.
Probably speak way more languages than this guy, and I can tell you that ChatGPT is pretty good for grammar. Uh, it works very well, including in languages that are more obscure. And anyway, if it wasn't, and you also have DeepL and Google Translate, and so on. And even if it wasn't that accurate, which it is, it's 99%, 99.9% accurate, I would say. Even then, it's it's better to learn a lot of vocabulary and sentences fast with only 99% accuracy, even if it was just 90% accuracy, which is not, it's better than that. But even if it wasn't as accurate, it's better to learn a lot with some inaccuracies, and then once you're exposed to native speaker content, fix the stuff that you learn kind of the wrong way. Like the one out of 100, or one out of 100, one out of 1,000 that you learn the wrong way. Um, it's much better to learn a lot, and then okay, this that I learned, yeah, they don't really say it like that, or they don't use in Spanish they don't say yo boy. No, they just say boy, because that's they don't you don't need to say boy or yo all the time. Um, Even if you learn to say everything yo boy yo yo, nobody speaks like that. But if you learn to speak like that, you'll very quickly realize that nobody speaks like that once you start listening to native speakers, native speaker content, podcasts, whatever, or hanging out with native speakers, and you're very quickly correct. You stop doing it, and that's it. So it needs to be good enough that helps you move into native speaker content as fast as possible. That's what it is for.
a course like I just laid out, because French speakers, especially if they know any linguistics, might know, for instance, to start with the feminine. Maybe. But also, real people trigger different
That's this is what these people. This is what these people don't get. Most people don't care about I barely care about linguistics. So imagine the average language learner. They just want to learn to speak the language and to understand it. They don't care about linguistics. You know,
responses in our brains than human like voices. At the end of the day, nobody's doing all of this. It's really hard, but it's what we should be trying to approximate. Can you learn a lot if you lock yourself in your room and watch an easy Italian video for 8 hours a day, every day for a week? Sure,
no,
but it's an absurd waste of time. The problem here
he's right in that. It's an absurd waste of time. That's why dreaming Spanish is a waste of time. I repeat, dreaming Spanish is a waste of time, and here's why.
doing all of this. It's really hard, but it's what we should be trying to approximate. Can you learn a lot if you lock yourself in your room and watch an easy Italian video for 8 hours a day, every day for a week? Sure, but it's an absurd waste of time. The problem here
You won't even learn that much, but again, 40 hours a week of YouTube videos in the language, massive waste of time. You need to learn actively. You need to learn vocabulary. You need to solve every problem that you encounter in language learning with specific solutions. Yeah, and just sitting in front of the computer and watching video after video will not help you. So this guy, yeah, I don't particularly like some of the stuff he says, but for the most part, I don't know why. I guess because Duolingo is popular, but I don't know why he talks so much about Duolingo and he uses Duolingo. It's just a massive waste of time as well. But the main things he said: learn vocab first. You need a lot of vocab before the input, because you don't learn the vocab with the input. You can learn it, but very very slowly. If you memorize the vocab before the input is going to be way easier. Yeah, things. Remember that, right?
here is what Donald Rumsfeld once famously called unknown unknowns. I bet you didn't have Rumsfeld on your Language Jones bingo sheet. The idea is that there are things that we don't know, and we don't know them. So memorizing French adjectives starting with the feminine is a really solid practice, but how many of you who speak French did that when you learned it? It's one of those things where you realize you wasted a lot of time.
Again, you don't memorize adjectives starting with the feminine. You take a list of example sentences, a couple hundred of them, with every gender mixed. Like if it's masculine and feminine, like French, okay, then it's just lots of example sentences, and you immediately learn to, not immediately, but after after reviewing the list a few times, you learn what's feminine, what's masculine. It's easy. Same for Spanish, masculine and feminine. If you're doing, I don't know, German or Russian, well, there's also like a neutral form, like an in between thing, like they are, the does. Um, then there's a third gender. Well, you learn to recognize that one, and that's it. Like in German, the der, die, das, and then all the variations. If you go and try to learn those lists of like all those tables of conjugations and stuff, it's a nightmare. Just learn lots of sentences, and you learn to use it in context.
After the fact. But basically, if you think about these points as you're using whatever you're using, they can be anchors for whether you're actually optimizing your time. And that's what it's really about. Because
Important. Like this guy has some really really good points and some, yeah, he's got some. See, he says there's a lot of fluff in between, like things that I don't know, just I don't care about. But there's a lot. There are some really important things that he's saying. First, vocabulary is really important. Memorization is important. Mnemonics work. Space repetition works. Combine space repetition and mnemonics. Vocabulary before the input, so the input is more comprehensible from the beginning, and also before your speaking practice, and optimize your time. Make When I say something is a waste of time, I don't mean that it will never work. I don't take everything literally. If it's going to take 20,000 hours of watching videos, and I say it's not going to work, I don't mean that it will literally never work. What I mean is that you'll have to be doing it for a decade, for hours every day, for it to work, which is basically not working. Like optimize your time means it's what I always say. If you can learn the same amount of content with a tenth of the time, then you should do that instead of doing the thing that's taking you 10 times more hours to learn the same thing. That's optimizing the time. Find something that works, that brings results faster, right? Really important. Like the faster you learn, the sooner you can speak the language, and the more time you have for something else. So you should do something that's efficient, not only effective. Optimize your time. This is also good. Like he's got generally good advice. It's like it's buried in a bunch of stuff that's not very relevant. It's just telling stories and stuff in between. But the general advice is really good. Is memorize vocab, mnemonics, space repetition, and that is what I would call mass sentences with listening, or shadowing is also space repetition if you do it over and over. And then vocabulary before the input, and go for effective and
you
efficient
can
things.
do all sorts of things. And eventually, most will be effective if you just stick with them. But for most, the idea is to learn how to navigate a new language, not just enjoy the process of studying forever. If you
Again, really important. This is the truth. It's about learning the language. It's about getting the results. It's about becoming fluent, not about enjoying the process. Just embrace the process. And yeah, you're going to be doing your Duolingo forever and watching your Dreaming Spanish videos that don't work for forever. That's not what you want. Your goal is not to enjoy the process. Your goal is to speak the language as soon as possible, right? So the more effective and efficient the things you do are, the sooner you'll get results, which is what you want. In general, really good advice with this guy. Basically, he basically says nobody's doing this, and then I'm here with my system, which is basically doing almost everything he said. It's everything he said plus retrieval practice, which is extremely important if your goal is to get really good at speaking. Retrieval practice is one of those things that neuro professors of neurolinguistics, people like Carl Newport or Andrew Huberman, people like that always recommend basically retrieving the information. You see it the first time, and then you. That's what I do with flashcards. Don't review. You just don't brainlessly look at the flashcards over. No, you get them in your language, and you try to translate into the target language. That's retrieval practice. You have to think, okay, how do I say this? Then you try to say it. You make mistakes. You look at the correct answer, and then you try again later on. And you do this with lots and lots and lots of words and then sentences. That's I think he didn't mention that at any point, but everything else, mnemonics again. I hate them, but they're good. Okay, then okay, you just don't want results. But his yeah, his advice was good. He's basically describing my system, except the language islands and the retrieval practice. But anyway, no, and the shadowing. He didn't talk about that either. So if you want to get good at speaking, you need to actually do speaking, and that's shadowing. But I liked the part about the vocab a lot. And not avoiding the hard work. That's basically that's basically the problem with language YouTube. It's just lots of people telling you this is how I learned this language the lazy way, and everyone's doing exactly the same. They're a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of Steve Kaufman, and it's just no one says anything original. Um, at least this guy tells the truth, right? Or at least he tries to, you know, do some critical thinking and not just parrot what others saying. I guess he's smart enough for that, considering he's got a PhD. Anyway, that's this video has been way longer than I expected. I'm going to go back to work now. See you later with more Japanese videos.